Okay, so this video initially was inspired by me wanting to do a comparison of traditional style eau de cologne perfumes. And I'm talking about, I guess, the one that really sort of started everything for 7-Eleven. And the very new and much more expensive Cologne Celeste by Celine, because I have mentioned quite recently how much I like this new cologne from Celine. And so it got me interested in doing a comparison video, but then actually once I started thinking about what cologne or eau de cologne is in perfumery, and even terminology of cologne, I kind of decided to sort of expand this video topic a little bit and talk about the different. Well, I'll talk about actual eau de cologne style perfumes, and then I will talk briefly on what it means in terms of concentration in perfume, in fragrance, and then using the word cologne and its actual associations within fragrance users. I'm deliberately not saying perfume in this case because I just want to touch on that later on in the video. But what I'll start off with first is a little brief. This is not an in-depth review or comparison, a little brief comparison between a current version of the original 7-Eleven Eau de Cologne and Cologne Celeste from Celine. And then I was also going to just also add in one of my favourite eau de cologne style perfumes just to give you a bit of a comparison. So let's start off with this 7-Eleven cologne, which originated in Cologne in Germany, which is basically why it's, what it's named after. And it was in from memory, the early 1700s when it was first put together. And it's been around since. And I read, and I could be wrong, but I did read that it's still the same family that run this company in Cologne and still making this 7-Eleven. Now, this is really cheap to buy. I bought this 100ml bottle from local pharmacy chain, and it was less than $20. And I was actually pleasantly surprised by how good it smelled, because I had smelled the Cologne Celeste first, and believe it or not, I had not actually smelled 7-Eleven up until I bought it. So I'm just going to spray some on, and as I'm smelling, the traditional recipe, I guess, or scent profile of this eau de cologne and everything else that it influenced after. It's basically using citruses. It's heavily reliant on citruses, neroli, in this case, some herbs. And after that traditional eau de cologne base or profile became really popular and was expanded on by a lot of different brands, which I'll mention in the video. But essentially, it was that really light, refreshing spritz of perfume to sort of make you feel a bit clean, refreshed, and just re-energized. And it was originally, given that the materials that were used, the botanicals that were used in the original formula, it was never something that ever lasted on skin. Those particular ingredients are quite volatile when they burn up and once you hit the skin, you can never expect a perfume in this style, especially with original formulas using mainly natural ingredients, to ever last long. Stuff like citruses and neroli just are not long-lasting notes. Now, I guess over time, and particularly with something like Cologne Celeste, you can add things like clean musks that will, I guess, help with it, like staying on the skin a bit longer. But always those citrus and bright top notes of the neroli will eventually disappear and won't stay on your skin very long. Now, I have to say that I mean, I really like the way Cologne Celeste smells, but I have to say I'm so impressed with how good the 4711 smells as well. And they are pretty similar. I would say that the citruses, in particular, this orange note is much more prevalent in the 4711 than it is in the Cologne Celeste by Celine. That one is more neroli reliant, but they are very similar, apart from those, I guess, slight changes in pitch. It's almost like they're just tuned to a different pitch each, but there's obviously a similarity. Now, I'm not going to go into too in depth into things like I can tell you that the Cologne Celeste on my skin does last longer, and I guess it's got the benefit of having maybe some aroma chemicals in that blend or formulation that allow it to be detected on the skin for longer than the 4711. But when we look at pricing, so this comes in a variety of sizes. You can get like big, at least 500 ml bottles of 4711, very cheap still, and you can just stick it in the fridge on hot days and splash it on regularly throughout the day. Celine, with this particular fragrance, it only comes in a 250 ml bottle, so there are no size options. It gives you the option of having it as a splash and adding a spray, but it is, in Australian dollars, more than $500 retail. And that fact alone doesn't put me off. Like, it didn't initially put me off wanting to, potentially buying this, but the fact that it only comes in that big size means it's only that price, and I would probably be looking to see if I can find someone to split with. But then I smelled this, and I figured that, especially in summer and it's hot days, I could just stock up on this. And the difference between the actual smell, honestly, was not enough for me to want to buy a big bottle, especially if I've got this. But in the background of that, my favorite eau de cologne style perfume is actually still Mugler Cologne. Now, this is discontinued now, but I really love. This is kind of less sparkly citrus than the other two. Definitely lots of neroli, orange blossom, and the musks are a lot heavier. The clean musks are a lot heavier with Mugler Cologne. But like I said, this is discontinued, although I think it's been renamed in a different line of Mugler, but I'm not even sure if that's available anymore. But that is what you would imagine an eau de cologne. If someone was talking about an eau de cologne style, that's the type of scent profile you'd look at. And houses like Acqua di Parma, for instance, so their Colonia range, definitely have expanded on that style of perfumery. Now, that kind of leads me into the next way that the word cologne is actually used, and that's in describing or naming particular concentrations of fragrances. So a lot of you will have seen a graphic similar to this one where it basically gives you concentration ranges of where, the most amount of percentage of oils, perfume oils in the carrier, the alcohol, is higher. So the less percentage of oils means it starts off at eau fraiche or eau de cologne. Then eau de toilette is the next highest, and then eau de parfum, and then you have parfum extrait, which has got the highest percentage of oils. Now, I have come. I mean, I'm pretty sure that this is not a rigid and binding rule. It's just kind of guidelines, because I happened to have a look through some of my bottles that I can where I can find the alcohol volume for each of the perfumes that I have, and it's kind of all over the place in terms of naming and percentages and that kind of thing. For instance, I have this bottle of Acqua di Parma, which gets described as a cologne spray, which is confusing for starters. But then at the bottom, it's called eau de toilette, but the percentage of alcohol in here is 80%, which technically means it could be called an eau de parfum. And then I have something like this 1740 from Histoire de Parfum, and that is 81% alcohol, and that's still within the eau de parfum range. So it's quite confusing. I have fragrances that are called cologne, but then at the bottom of this Guerlain fragrance, it's called eau de toilette. Fragrances that are as light and I guess fresh and long, as fleeting as an eau de cologne, and yet Pampelune from the Aqua Allegoria line is called eau de toilette on the bottom of there. A lot of Santa Maria Novella are what they call eau de cologne, but I couldn't find what percentage of oils there were in my particular fragrance. I have Eau d'Hermès from Hermès. This is an eau de toilette, and it does say that it's 85% alcohol, which means it's obviously got less oils in there. But then I have things like Patrick, which is a cologne spray, and then Sandalwood Cologne by Trumper. And funnily enough, they get called cologne. They may well be eau de cologne concentration, but they're actually quite long lasting. So performance what this tells me is that performance has more to do with materials used in the perfume or in the composition than the actual concentration, although the concentration does obviously contribute. But we have something like this eau de cologne number 5, and we know that Chanel have different concentrations of number 5. They all smell like number 5. But in the case of something like this, sometimes there are some of the materials that are used in it come out more in the different concentrations. So, for instance, in this eau de cologne number 5, I definitely smell more civet in this, and it's less floral than the eau de toilette and eau de parfum. And still lasts a long time, even though they call it an eau de cologne. So it's interesting. And essentially what I guess I would tell people, particularly people new to perfume, is I essentially wouldn't pay too much attention to when you see eau de toilette, eau de cologne, eau de parfum in a fragrance line, I would not take it for granted that what the stronger concentration will last longer or project more. What I would do is, if you get the opportunity to test different concentration, just smell them and see which one you like the smell of better, because they won't necessarily perform based on their concentration, and they won't necessarily be called, for instance, eau de cologne, but they still might have the concentration of an eau de toilette or an eau de parfum in some cases. So it is very confusing, and probably, I would say, not as important, I wouldn't put too much importance on the naming conventions of whether it's EDP, EDC, EDT, or parfum. Just be aware of the way fragrance houses, brands would use that. Like, I mean, in some cases, I think, like, for instance, Dior Sauvage, it originally came out as an EDT, and like, cynically, I kind of now look back and think that they were always going to release an EDP flanker and then a parfum flanker, and then we get into the realm of elixirs and absolus, and what are they even? And like a brand like Roger Dove even have perfumes that they call parfum colognes, which, I mean, what does that even mean? Brands can just make up whatever they like in terms of what they decide to call their perfumes. Now, at the risk, I know this video is already dragged on, and I don't want to talk too much longer, but the other reason I wanted to make this video and talk about this in particular was I did get asked in a recent video why I referred to my bottles as perfume, and particularly as a man. So apparently, there is, I guess it's a cultural thing where some guys don't feel comfortable actually referring to their fragrance as perfume, even though it technically might be called an eau de parfum. And perfume is another word for fragrance or scent. But obviously, for a long time, there has been this kind of separation in wearing fragrance market. Women wore perfume and men wore cologne, and for a long time in different parts of the world, and it definitely happened here when I was little. I remember men's fragrances specifically being called cologne, whether they were actually an eau de cologne or a cologne concentration. They were just referred to as cologne. So it would just be one other way for guys to identify that a perfume is being marketed to them. So it has kind of stuck around a little bit. But I'm just here to say that there is definitely, or there shouldn't be, any stigma with a guy, a man, straight man in particular, referring to their fragrances as perfumes, or eau de toilettes for that matter. It just struck me that it was like it's totally normal for me to talk about my perfumes rather than my colognes, because I just figure perfume is a more accurate descriptor of what I own and wear than calling them colognes, because as soon as I call them colognes, I'm trying to describe them as something different. Yes, I could call them fragrances or scents, but I just don't think there's anything wrong with a guy calling them perfumes and saying that he wears perfumes. I certainly don't feel any less masculine saying that, and but it's interesting, and I totally understand why some men, feel a little bit uncomfortable referring to it as perfume, but that's each to their own. But I guess I just want to put it out there that there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. Anyway, that is my ramble on cologne and its various meanings. So there you go. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments. I look forward to reading them. And if you're still awake, I'm saying goodbye now. Bye.